Hi everyone, hi לכולם. Can you let me know in the chat if you can hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Doran. Thank you, Michal. I'm not thanking all the other 72 people who didn't answer me, by the way. Okay, let's do this. Let's begin. Thank you so much for joining another Startup Designers webinar. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm so excited to have another event in English, although it's taking a toll on my mental health to speak English all day long. It's great to have speakers from abroad and to get to learn from people who work in San Francisco in the biggest companies like Aaron, who's gonna share his experience today. So just a few minutes before we begin, I want to tell you about our community and the people behind it. So, oh, and by the way, I always forget, this session is recorded. So if you have to step aside or if you want to share this amazing content with your friends, don't worry. We are streaming live to Facebook right now, hi Facebook, and you can find the recording there. And if you can, please let other people know, because you'll see that soon enough we'll get questions like, is there a recording? So spread the word. Okay, so the people behind the community. Other than myself, I'm Shir. Nice to meet you all. We have Ina and Michal and Lishai and Rotal. And I want to tell you a bit about what every one of us is doing. So let's start with Lishai. Lishai manages our Instagram page. And for us, the Instagram is the place where we can share beautiful, amazing content of other designers from all around the world, and especially Israeli designers. So people would get to see the amazing people and professional designers we have here. So if you just want to get if you just want to get inspired by other designers, especially Israeli ones, please follow us at Startup Designers. We also have a newsletter led by Michal. So our newsletter is all about preventing FOMO, fear of missing out. Michal is working very hard to deliver the most concise pieces of information for designers directly for your emails. I should mention, by the way, that for now, and Michal, I am saying for now, the newsletter is in Hebrew. So if you're not Hebrew readers, I apologize. But if you are more than welcome to join. You can find a link in our Facebook group, in the bio, or in the post that Michal shares weekly. Okay, I'm almost done, but I can't not mention our amazing mentorship program. So the mentorship program is led by Ina. And this is really our cherry on the top, because the mentorship program is all about giving back and finding other designers and creating a real community, even in COVID times where we're all at home. So right now we have over 150 mentors, all designers, or mostly designers, that give from their time to help our community grow, to help other professionals find a job, build their CV and portfolio, and even find themselves in a managerial position. We're always looking for new mentors, and I think our mentors would love to tell you what an amazing experience that is. So if you're interested in joining us, please go to our website at startupdesigners.co without the M to join as a mentor. And if you're interested in being a mentee, the program is currently closed for new registrations because it's just filled up, but we'll let you know in Facebook as soon as new places open up. So with that, I'm done, and I want to present you to our truly amazing speaker today, Aaron. Aaron, before I give you the permissions, I want to introduce you properly. So I want to tell you all why I'm so excited to have Aaron here. is a product designer with an avid interest in spatial computing. He led growth design at Oculus for several years, where he helped launch Oculus Go and Oculus Quest. He is currently an independent UX design contractor for teams at Facebook Reality Labs, the group that encompasses all the Facebook's VR and AR product initiatives. Aaron enjoys hiking and biking together with his wife around the Seattle area where they live. So we're so fortunate to have an amazing speaker like you, Aaron, and I didn't even mention the amazing podcast you're doing with Omri, but I'll let you continue the introduction. And yeah, we're all excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Shir, for the lovely introduction. Let me start the screen share here. Let's see. Give me 1 sec. I have to restart Zoom for it to have privileges. I'm sorry. I'll be back in 1 moment.
Okay. Well done. This is our call. So let's find something to talk about. Children time Ivrit. No, we might have English speakers. We need to practice English. Dor. I'm thinking of an. Oh, okay. Everyone's joining. I just didn't the meeting, which makes sense. Meanwhile, okay, I found an activity. Write in the chat if you ever worked on a product with AR or VR features. Okay, we have Ofer. But Ofer worked on everything. Okay, Olga, Noah. Aaron, I gave you co-hosting permissions, so let me know if you can.
Excellent.
Share. Just so you'll know, we have people in the chat writing if they worked on AR or VR features. So you already have some people with a good understanding in the crowd.
That's great. Yeah, I'm seeing a surprising amount of yeses. Very cool. Okay, let's fire this up here.
We can see.
See if I can hide the. Just hide this Zoom interface here.
No worries.
All right, great. Okay, so thank you again, Shir, for having me, and thanks to the entire startup designers community for the warm welcome. I really appreciate it. First, a big greetings from Seattle. Good evening and or good morning, depending upon where you're joining from. I hope everybody's doing well. I know times are very difficult, but I really hope everybody is staying safe and healthy. Yeah, as Shir mentioned, thanks for joining. My name is Aaron Draczynski, and I'm excited to talk to everybody about VR and AR today. You know, I was a product designer at Facebook for a few years, but I really was, I'm kind of like an early tech adopter, and I always had I had a lot of enthusiasm for virtual reality. So when the opportunity arose to join Oculus, I really jumped at it. And I joined the Oculus team in 2017, where I helped establish the growth team and lead growth design efforts for Oculus. Last year, I did leave my full-time job to go independent as a designer, but I'm still working with the same team as a design contractor for Facebook Reality Labs, which is that big group that encompasses all of Facebook's VR and AR projects right now. So my first job really upon joining Oculus was to help continue the momentum for Oculus Rift. So obviously that was the first consumer product from Oculus. You know, Kickstarter, the infamous Kickstarter that raised so much money, it all went into building the kind of dream product for consumers to finally bring VR to the masses. And that culminated in Oculus Rift in 2017. So when I joined, the product was about a year old. And since that time, I've kind of had my hand in supporting the launch of many other Oculus products. And it's been a blast. We learn so much from each new thing that we launch, but um, we have Oculus Go, which was a standalone headset, and then more recently Oculus Quest and the Quest 2, which just came out actually. So all that being said, the opinions I'm going to offer here today are mine alone and don't necessarily reflect those of Oculus or Facebook, because I've got a couple of spicy opinions to share. So let's dive in. There's so much to talk about, and VR, AR, spatial computing, it is a really broad subject matter. And I kind of struggled to decide how to narrow it down for the discussion today. And I was thinking, should I teach people how to use Unity to build something in 3D? Honestly, that could be an hour-long lesson in itself. But ultimately, I thought today we could go through some of the fundamental concepts and talk about some of the design do's and don'ts, and approach this more from the perspective of people who are savvy 2D designers. They're used to building websites and mobile apps, but maybe haven't really had the chance to dive into actual AR or VR design yet, and maybe they're not too familiar with the current state of affairs. So with that in mind, I thought we could kind of cover the fundamentals and talk through a lot of these concepts together. So here's kind of the agenda that I put together for the presentation in terms of what we'll cover today. First, just talking through what are VR, AR, and MR, and how do you distinguish between them. The second topic will be, what's the current state of the world for VR and AR? Because they clearly haven't taken over yet. So where are we at here? The third is, why now? Like, why is now a good time to even consider this stuff? Why should you bother? The fourth is some of those fundamental things that I think would be valuable to know about how VR and AR work, and some of those design do's and don'ts. And then finally, a little bit about next steps and what you can do to kind of dive in a little deeper into this entire space. Okay, so let's jump in. So VR, AR, and MR, people seem to have different opinions on the labels, what they mean, when they're supposed to be used, and how they're different from each other. And it's led to some confusion and some spirited debates within the community. But I thought I'd share my interpretations of each of them. So I think virtual reality is probably the most straightforward of the bunch for people to interpret, because virtual reality, it consumes your senses and you're just in an entirely different space. So it's complete immersion in a different world than the one you live in. So obviously a VR headset, something like an Oculus headset, is going to transport you to someplace entirely different, like fighting with Darth Vader. Augmented reality, I view as more of an overlay, which is going to supplement the things that you're seeing in real life. So all of your real world surroundings are enhanced by computer generated visuals and information and widgets. And I think, to date, most of our product experiences with AR have probably been through the lens of the smartphone. And there's some popular examples here. Obviously, IKEA with dropping in a chair, a virtual chair into your living room to see how it looks amongst your home decorations, or obviously social media and Snapchat lenses and the entire ecosystem of AR filters that kind of exists for overlaying things on top of your camera. Now, mixed reality, or MR, is where it gets a little trickier. And I interpret MR as a more true to life version of AR. It's like a better, more realistic version of AR, because it's not just computer generated objects that are overlaid on top of your real world, but they actually have an awareness of your real world environment and the objects around you, and the two can kind of interact. So an example here is that virtual objects converge with your physical space. So you might have a toy figurine, a virtual hologram toy figurine, but it's sitting on top of your actual coffee table. And a good example of that is Microsoft HoloLens. And one famous demo they do is the Minecraft example, or like the Lego building block kind of example, where your living room coffee table is transformed into kind of like this play space. Now, I think some people, the confusion really sets in when you hear people use these terms somewhat interchangeably, and um, I think it's made even harder by the fact that uh, I don't know. It's like companies just brand their products however they feel like, and I don't think there's ever been like a a common ground that the industry has really settled on. But complicating that even more is that the AR experiences on our smartphones are actually starting to behave more like MR. So the sensors are getting better in the iPhones, and if you open up some of those AR kit experiences, you can actually place objects on top. You can place virtual objects on top of your actual real world furniture and things like that. So there is starting to be like this kind of mixed reality feel to the AR that we get on smartphones. I think another big point of confusion for this is that Microsoft has a suite of products called Windows Mixed Reality, but it's actually more virtual reality. It's basically VR headsets, and if you go on the Microsoft website to look at mixed reality, um, it's talking about virtual reality. And I think this is just I think that was probably a big contributor to some of the like the misunderstanding around what each of these are and how they're different. And I kind of view it like the kind of internet wars between GIF or GIF in terms of pronunciation, because at the end of the day, it's like this this ongoing battle that people spend time on. But my controversial take on this is that it actually doesn't really matter. And um, maybe it does matter slightly today, but eventually it's really not going to matter. And I think the reason I feel that way is because from my perspective, all of these technologies are really starting to blur together. So we're starting to see virtual reality do very MR like things. So we've typically considered virtual reality as this, you're entirely closed off and isolated from the world, but now we're starting to see VR headsets that have pass-through cameras, and those pass-through cameras are showing your real world environment and overlaying things on top of it. So that's a little more like MR or maybe even AR. So all of these things are starting to blur together. Like I mentioned, AR on our phones is starting to do more things that we might normally consider to be MR. And I think it's all converging together so much that the nomenclature or the terms we use are really becoming almost irrelevant. And it's definitely not worth arguing over. So with that being said, let's move on and talk about the current realities of virtual reality and augmented reality. I wanted to talk about the state of AR and VR today and do a bit of a reality check because, like I mentioned earlier, these technologies, they haven't really caught on in a super, um, in a super crazy popular taking over the world kind of phenomenon. They haven't replaced our smartphones or our computers yet. So, I mean, what's been going on then? Like, why haven't they done that yet? And where does that leave them currently? Um, and so I figured we'd start with AR here. And I think from my perspective, AR hasn't really taken off yet. It isn't something we particularly use every day, or even use. I mean, maybe I might use an AR experience a couple times a week, even if that. But um, that's not to discredit the cool things that are happening in terms of the AR apps and features and experiences that people are building for smartphones. But for the most part, I think they still feel like novelties. And a lot of them are kind of fun tech demos that they're cool to play around with and maybe show to other people. But AR experiences are not something that we really depend on yet. It's not like a day-to-day activity. And, you know, I think part of this is because our window to the AR world has been smartphones, and I'll get into that in a minute. But I think for now in this space, we have seen cool AR stuff. Obviously, the first thing that probably comes to mind is all the camera stuff, face filters and face masks, and doing cool things with overlays on top of photos. There's a lot of creativity in that space, which is very cool. We talked about shopping, dropping furniture into your living room space and visualizing what it looks like. I've noticed that even Amazon now has an AR button on some of their product pages in their mobile app where you can see what like a 3D render of the product looks like, on your table or next to your couch. Um, Navigation, I think, has been another interesting one, guiding you with directions or showing you around like a museum where you're moving the camera around and it's showing information as you hover over some of the paintings, things like that. And there's also been the kind of like the utility category, which is things around measuring how long your table is, or like this accurate virtual ruler, that kind of thing. And these are all really cool applications of AR technology, but none of it has really been enough to supercharge AR and make it an integral part of our daily lives. And time for another hot take. I don't think AR is going to get past that phase until the glasses come into reality. And I think the reason for that is there needs to be a device that is AR first. For our smartphones, a lot of these AR features and functionality, it's like being relegated to a separate mode in an app. Like in the Amazon app, you have to press a button to view the thing in AR, or it's kind of like additive to the existing mobile experiences, whereas it's not the primary experience. And I don't think AR will be the default mode of operation on a smartphone because we don't live in the camera app. And that's why I just don't see it getting the traction it needs until there is an AR first device. Talking about VR, I think we all know there was a lot of initial hype around VR, and I think that was for several reasons. A lot of the money and the investment that went into that space, and eventually that hype died down and the reality set in. And I think a lot of people kind of dismissed VR, or they hadn't necessarily been paying attention to what's been going on in that space because maybe they're more excited about AR and AR glasses and that whole future opportunity. But VR has actually been making tremendous progress. So yeah, we look at the Kickstarter, we look at the $2 million raised and the huge acquisition of Oculus by Facebook. And all of this was kind of leading us to this idea that we were going to have a VR revolution. And that, the technology was finally going to be the thing that took us into a whole new generation of computing. So what happened? Why hasn't that happened yet? I think the first problem was that the hype cycle, all of the hype and excitement, it built up too much before VR was actually ready for the masses. So the way I look at this is kind of like a chart that I kind of put together to visualize how I think VR needs to grow and evolve for it to actually be successful as like a mass market product. And the three factors I consider are accessibility. So that means, what's the barrier to entry and is it affordable? Form factor, which is, is this going to be ridiculously complicated to set up? Am I going to need a crazy computer? How is this going to feel when I'm wearing it? Is it this heavy, bulky, awful piece of equipment that I'm not going to want to stay in for a long period of time? And then on top of that is the content. At the end of the day, it could be cheap and it could be comfortable, but if there's nothing good to do, then nobody's going to want to use VR. And I think where Oculus failed with that first consumer headset was actually in all three regards, because first of all, it was too expensive and you had to have a powerful gaming PC that could drive the entire headset. It was also, as for a first generation product, like you'd expect, a little on the heavier side. And you had to install these, 2 sensor cameras in the corners of your room for it to be able to track your position. And then finally, because it was such a new industry, there wasn't much content yet. There were no famous AAA blockbuster recognizable games. And it was still a lot of developers just trying to get their feet wet and figure out what kinds of things they could build. And it meant that there weren't really long, captivating games to play. And I think the biggest part, though, is really that accessibility part on the bottom of the stack. And if you look at what it costs to get into VR a few years ago, the headset was $600. the controllers were sold separately for $200. You had to have a gaming PC that was powerful enough to drive the headset, which is probably at least $500, probably more. So you're looking at least a $1,300 US investment just to be able to use a VR headset. So there was no way that this was going to become a mass market device. VR was not mass market ready, but it has come a long way in the past 4 years. And that leads me to the next section of the presentation, which is why is now a good time to jump into VR and AR design? So why get excited about VR? Well, VR is experiencing a lot of momentum right now. And I don't know what the situation is like for other companies, but for Oculus, I know that over the past year, we've been selling Oculus Quest headsets as fast as we could make them. And the people that were buying them are people that are new to VR. Something like 90% of the people who bought or people who were using a Quest in the past year, they had not owned an Oculus device before. So it's not like it's just the same group of hardcore early VR adopter fanatics that are buying the Oculus headsets each time a new one comes out, but the VR user base is actually expanding and growing to reach new people. And it's not just on the user base side, the hardware side, there's been tremendous progress. The software side, there's actually cool stuff to do now. So I think there really has been tremendous progress on all fronts. And I think when I ask a lot of people what their past VR experience has been like, they're usually talking about the Gear VR or a Google Cardboard, little makeshift device, or maybe PlayStation VR, where you're rigging up this whole thing into your PlayStation system. And even just in this amount of time, so much has improved in all of the faults that these products had, that I think if any of these have been your experience with VR, I think you owe it to yourself to try one of these newer products, because it is like night and day in terms of the quality and just like the ease of use of the experience. So just to kind of talk about some of the progress in the past few years, um, I'll just go through some of these here. The first one is VR is now like an all-in-one product. So you don't have to have a PC anymore. You don't have to dock your phone into the headset. It's basically a standalone product, and it's wireless, and it doesn't have to be attached to anything. So it's portable. You can take it anywhere. I take it to like my family's house and show it to my parents and my niece and nephews and that kind of stuff. So it's not like this cumbersome system of wires and sensors and all of this extra stuff. It's basically like it's all in its own neat little self-contained unit. I think another big one is the ergonomics have improved. So newer VR headsets are a little bit lighter. They're definitely not to like what I would consider the ideal form factor yet. There's still kind of like this scuba mask, ski mask type of chunky form factor on your head. It's gotten lighter, but it's still big. I think that miniaturization of the technology will happen, but they are getting lighter. And one thing that's equally important as reducing the weight is distributing the weight more evenly. So actually in this photo, this is like the new strap for Quest 2, which has a battery in the back as a counterweight. So it doesn't feel like all the weight is pushing down on your face. Another big change is higher resolution displays. So text is actually crisp and readable now. One of the more unfortunate things about VR was that things always looked a little blurry, a little fuzzy, and especially for text, it wasn't particularly comfortable to read. One kind of cause of that is what we call the screen door effect. So it's kind of like looking through a screen door, that kind of wire mesh. That's what it felt like sometimes to put on the headset and just see like the pixel arrangement. And that has improved as well. So, this example on the left is a previous headset. The example on the right is, a Quest 2, where just changing the display technology with a different pixel arrangement has dramatically improved like the crispness of text. Another one, hand tracking. This is big. I bet a lot of people didn't know that hand tracking is a real thing now in VR, but you don't even need controllers anymore. So this, with Quest and Quest 2, you can just pick up the headset and put it on, and it recognizes your hands. You didn't have to pull out the controllers at all. So you can interact with the operating system and compatible games just by using your hands. And finally, I think the really exciting one for me is that it's expanding beyond gaming. So there are so many possibilities from on the productivity front. And this is just an example of some of the work being done at Oculus to enable multitasking. So you can have a multi-monitor setup, as many monitors as you want, as big as you want, and you can take it anywhere with you because it's just this portable headset. So you can go plop on the couch and have all your work, your multi-monitor setup wherever you want. Um, so huge things happening in the productivity space. Another example here is this company called Immersed, which is doing awesome stuff with real physical keyboard accessible in VR. So it's tracking the position of your real keyboard, and you can see each finger as it hits the key. So finally, you can actually get work done in VR. You have a keyboard, you have a mouse, you have your hands, and these however many monitors you want, and it's just kind of like I think it's a good taste of what's to come in terms of the whole idea of VR becoming a computing platform. So, looking back again at the original Oculus Rift, um, I think it kind of fell short in so many of these fronts. And comparing that to where we've come today in just 4 years, I think we've improved a lot. I don't think we're perfect, but I definitely know that the accessibility part it's so much more affordable now, and you don't even need an expensive gaming computer or any computer at all. The form factor, like I said, it's lighter. It's not ideal, but it's gotten so much better in the sense that you don't have to be bogged down by wires and external cameras. And the content is really getting better. There are really popular, really great AAA titles. There's recognizable gaming IP on the way. So franchises people already know, like Assassin's Creed, things like that, are coming to VR next year. And the use cases are expanding, like productivity. So I think the hierarchy of needs that I have here for VR to finally become a more successful and reasonable product for the mass market, it's making really good progress. I really want to hone in on that affordability part because that is maybe the most important part. So going back to when you needed that expensive gaming computer and the cost of entry was so high, just within a few years, the cost of entry now $300 compared to 1,300 US dollars. So that opens the door to VR for a lot more people, and that's there's kind of always been this chicken and egg problem for VR where there weren't enough people who owned headsets, so there weren't enough people making apps. But now that user base is expanding significantly, so uh, I think we're going to see a lot of cool stuff happening in the VR space. It's shaping up to become a major computing platform. Like I said, there's definite momentum there, and I just think it's going to be in a really good position for the next couple of years. So that's why I'm excited about VR. Let's talk about AR. So why dive into AR design? Um, I think maybe the biggest reason is the AR glasses are coming, and uh, I think we know everybody's working on them. Facebook is working on them. Apple's working on them. Everybody wants a normal pair of glasses that you can wear all day long, that don't look stupid, and that are going to give you access to timely information and let you communicate with the people you care about, and not have to stare down at our phones all the time. So the AR glasses are coming, and just to while we're talking about kind of like the current reality of AR, I think the reality is that Apple's going to have a huge advantage out of the gate because they've been fostering this ecosystem of developers for their AR kit apps for years on the iPhone. So that is just a huge win out of the gate. That I imagine that when their AR glasses product comes out, so many, if not all of those experiences are probably going to work on the glasses. So that is just an unbelievable advantage on day one. And then you think of the new iPhone 12 Pro, which has a LiDAR sensor on the back, and it's brilliant. It's like millions of people will already have a dev kit for those glasses. You'll have the phone with a camera and the sensor, and it's like you'll be able to simulate having the glasses and start building apps. It's brilliant. So the reality is for both VR and AR, the pieces are really coming together on both fronts. They're both really gearing up to become full-fledged computing platforms of the future. And I think it just took longer than people expected, or than like the huge hype cycle and the news cycle suggested it would be coming. But I think the pieces are coming together. It's starting to be more clear how everything is going to converge. And this is why I think as UX designers, it's a really exciting opportunity to help shape the future paradigms in this space. Because at this point, I think we know how to make pretty good designs for mobile apps and websites. But there's so much opportunity for VR and AR. Nobody has really cracked the case yet. I think about like pull to refresh, that gesture that we all kind of take for granted now on our device, on our mobile devices, and how ubiquitous that became. And I wonder, like, who's going to be the person that will create that kind of enduring interaction or paradigm for VR and AR? Like, what is it going to be? Who's going to be the person to make it? And that's what's so exciting to me about working in this space. It's just wide open territory, and you get to try really new things. And I mean, even for Oculus, I can tell you that we're still learning because we definitely do not have things figured out, judging by, how frequently we like to redesign our core system interface and our first party apps. We're still trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. Um, and that's just what's so exciting. Like if you're feeling like you're not learning enough new things during your, typical mobile app design, web design, kind of 2D design process, there is a lot of cool stuff that you can be learning when you're working in this space. And I really do think spatial computing is going to be amazing. I think it's going to feel incredibly natural and intuitive, these platforms. And that leads me to my next and perhaps most controversial statement, which is I think we're going to look back at the era of smartphones and laugh at how primitive it was. This is maybe the hottest take of them all. Maybe it's a little overzealous, but I'm sticking with it. I really do feel this way because whenever I open my desk drawer and I look at the bottom and I see this old iPhone that's been sitting at the bottom of the drawer, I'm always struck by how ancient it looks with its chunky borders around the screen. It just looks almost prehistoric compared to the phones that we have today. And that exact feeling, that sense of amazement and disbelief, I think that's how we're going to feel 10 or 20 years from now when we compare smartphones to spatial computing. We're going to think how crazy it was that our window to the internet and all the information, all the communications we have with people we care about, it was all done through these small little rectangles. And I think that's going to feel crazy. So with that said, let's dive into some of the fundamental concepts of VR and AR. So I wanted to spend a few minutes highlighting some of the core technologies that make VR and AR experiences so unique and that really differentiate it from the 2D experiences that we're all accustomed to using. And this part gets a little technical. I'll get into a little more technical aspects. So if you're not into that, feel free to go grab a snack and come back in 3 minutes. So technologies. Positional tracking. This is really important stuff in the world of VR and AR. And these terms here, 3DOF and 6DOF, stands for 3 degrees of freedom and 6 degrees of freedom. And basically every VR headset is classified as either 3DOF or 6DOF. So 3DOF, or 3 degrees of freedom, means that the headset can detect rotational movement. So it can detect whether you've turned your head left or right, back and forth, tilted it from side to side, but that's it. It's basically just kind of calculating the angle and rotation of your head, but not your actual movement around the space. And that's in contrast to 6DOF, or 6 degrees of freedom, sometimes called room scale VR. And that means the headset can track not just rotation, but also like your position in 3D space, your movement. So it can track whether the user has actually moved left or right and forward and backward and higher and lower. So that's really important stuff. And the way that the headset knows that the user has moved or that they've kind of changed their location within the 3D space is through a technology, or I guess a technique called SLAM, or simultaneous localization and mapping. Because the VR or AR headset needs to be able to map out the environment as well as the user's location within that environment. And Oculus VR headsets, Apple's AR kit on the iPhone, self-driving cars, all those things use SLAM to see their surroundings. So for VR headsets like Oculus Quest, the SLAM system is actually using several ultra-wide cameras on the outside of the headset as well as an accelerometer and a gyroscope to track inertia. And it's basically taking the data from the cameras and the sensors to update and generate a map in real time and then determine the user's position within that map. And that calculation happens every millisecond. So here you can see how the headset is basically finding any objects that they can see, then it can use as a landmark to remember its environment. So the corner and edges of your coffee table, the things you have sitting on top of it, all of these things that can help it remember, where it is and help it orient its location. And interestingly enough, that means if you lived in like a super minimalist kind of lifestyle and you barely have any furnishings and things like that in your house or nothing hanging on your walls, then the VR or AR headset might actually have a hard time orienting itself because there's no distinguishing visual elements that it can latch onto. One other term that I actually mentioned before in the context of the iPhone, but you've probably heard around before as well, is LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. And LiDAR is often discussed in the context of self-driving cars, but basically it's a type of sensor that can be used to help run the SLAM technique that we just talked about. So what a LiDAR sensor is basically doing is it's firing lasers, and those lasers are bouncing off of objects and then bouncing back to the sensor. And then the sensor is basically measuring how much time it took for that round trip to happen. So you can basically determine the distance between objects using those calculations and create a 3D map of the environment that way. Sometimes that's called a time of flight sensor, but it's the same thing. And we talked about the LiDAR sensor in the iPhone 12 Pro. Apple's LiDAR sensor on the new iPhone isn't quite at the level of power as like a LiDAR sensor on a self-driving car because those have way more range. But from what I've heard, I think the iPhone's LiDAR sensor is going to give you like a 16-foot range, which is still pretty good. So, you combine that data from the LiDAR sensor with the camera data on the phone and the other, sensors like the accelerometer and the gyroscope, and you're going to get like a super accurate map of the environments around, the person with a phone. So it's very cool stuff. So that's a brief overview of positional tracking. I also briefly want to talk about hand, face, and body tracking because these are also like really important things that are going to add to the immersion of any AR or VR experience. So hand tracking, like you saw in the video already, the user can use the AR or VR system without any controllers. Face tracking is basically going to allow for more expressive avatars. So let's say you're in a VR meeting or an AR hologram chat of some kind. Your actual facial expressions would come across. It can detect, your smile, your frown. So that way people will be able to see your reactions on your avatar as if they would normally be able to if they had been sitting in the same room with you. Body tracking will allow for a greater sense of immersion as well, because it might actually be your actual leg and foot movement that are, kicking the football in the game or something like that. Eye tracking, this is another interesting one. It can also lead to more expressive avatars because your avatar can properly represent, where you're looking, that kind of stuff. I think in terms of UX design, it's interesting because suddenly if we know where the user is looking, like maybe you can hide certain parts of the interface until they look at a relevant area and then specific toolbar options appear, stuff like that. But actually a bigger implication for eye tracking is the specific capability it unlocks called varifocal. So varifocal is basically a type of lens system that can support multiple focal planes, which lets you have a VR or AR device that has multiple focal lengths. So what I mean by that is right now in a VR headset, let's say you're trying to focus on some object in a game that's really close to you in VR. You actually can't focus on it and it's going to look blurry no matter what you do, because in reality, your eyes aren't actually focusing on a near or a far object. Your eyes are actually just trying to focus on this screen inside the headset that's at this fixed distance from your eyes. So you're never going to be able to focus on that thing that's really close. So what varifocal will let you do is, thanks to the eye tracking, it will know that you're trying to look at something really close, and it can actually invisibly, seamlessly shift the focal planes of the lenses to make it clear up close. So on the left, you see what it looks like if varifocal is off. The label on the cassette tape is very blurry. On the right, thanks to eye tracking, varifocal, it knows you're trying to look at that label. And as it gets closer to you, very close to the camera, it's able to change the focal plane so that part of the image is in focus. So that's eye tracking and optics. And one last technology I wanted to call out, which I think is underrated but very important, is spatial audio. So spatial audio is basically a very clever way of delivering sound to the user in a way that is very much where you would realistically expect the audio to be coming from in 3D space. So, in real life, our ears are able to basically determine the position of a sound source. We can tell where some sound came from pretty accurately. And spatial audio is basically able to replicate that and create a very realistic illusion of sound coming from certain places within the virtual world. And that is really, really critical for immersion. All right. So thanks for sticking with me here through that technical stuff. At this point, we've kind of laid the groundwork for, we have an understanding of the state of the industry, and we talked through how some of the magic works. And now I'll dive into some of the do's and don'ts for just things to keep in mind, I guess, as you embark on your design exploration process for VR and AR. So really the biggest takeaway, the one thing to really remember here is that comfort is the most important design consideration. It is basically the guiding principle that every decision you make should be made through. So imagine this. Let's say you designed an iPhone app that was so bad that not only did the person immediately stop using your app, but it also made them never want to use an iPhone ever again. That would be pretty bad. And that sounds silly, but in VR or AR, it's actually not difficult to achieve something like that. Because if you make the wrong design decisions and your user becomes sick or uncomfortable, they won't ever want to use your app or that headset again. Then they will forever curse VR or AR, and they'll tell their friends how horrible and queasy it made them feel. So poor user experience choices can cause eye strain. It makes your eyes tired much faster. It can make you dizzy. It could make you disoriented, or it can make you nauseous and feel like you're going to throw up. And that is a really bad first impression, and that's really difficult to change later. So comfort is key. And I think one other thing that's really important to keep in mind is remember that you're a designer working in VR and AR, so you're going to spend a lot of time in that space, and your body's going to get used to that. So the worse you're going to become at experiencing the discomfort that your actual users might face. So as you spend more time in these platforms, you become less fazed by some of those UX patterns that might normally make somebody else feel uncomfortable. It's kind of like you go out on a boat on the ocean for the first time and you get seasick, but maybe you over time go out a few more times and you kind of develop a thicker stomach, a better stomach for it, and your body gets over it. It's kind of like the same here for VR and AR, where you develop a resistance and eventually you kind of miss out on things that might make a new user feel uncomfortable. So I think it's just important to remember that you need to make your decisions thoughtfully, and maybe even run them by people around you who don't have as much experience in VR and AR as you do. So let's just run through some of the design considerations here. Starting with the visual experience. So as I mentioned before, when I was talking about varifocal, things that are really close to the person's point of view, if it gets too close, it's going to be blurry. And varifocal is only something that's been shown off in prototypes yet. It hasn't made it to a consumer product yet. So until that day comes, you really don't want to show anything to the user that they really need to be able to focus on any closer than 1 meter from them. Keep it 1 meter away or further. That's why generally when we're designing UI for VR or AR, we keep it at least 1 meter away, maybe 2 meters. A second big tip is don't headlock your UI panels. So headlock is basically, as you kind of turn your head from left to right, you expect things to maintain their position in space. Like if I'm sitting at my desk here in front of my laptop and I turn my head to the left, I expect that laptop to stay there on the desk. And now it's kind of like out of my vision, out of my field of view. Whereas if that laptop was like headlocked to my position and was basically like following me around like that, it would feel very uncomfortable. It'd feel like something was stuck to my eyes. And sometimes this happens for things like dialogues, system warnings, things that are just programmed to pop up and not have any awareness of positional tracking and things like that. And sometimes people just don't know any better, and they'll just tell their UI dialogue to, they won't have it be tracked. They'll just choose it'll just end up being headlocked. And that is maybe one of the most nauseating things that you can do in virtual reality. So always make sure that nothing is being stuck to the user's view as they turn their head. Everything should have its own place in 3D space. And if the user turns their head, and then that thing should eventually be out of view, it should not be affixed to their vision. One more thing is you really want to give proper states to UI elements. And I know sometimes, I'm guilty of this in the past for website design. I get lazy. Sometimes I don't always add like an active state or a hover state to a button, things like that. But in VR and AR, you actually really, really want that stuff. Like it actually feels really wrong if you reach out with your hand and to touch like a virtual button and nothing happens. Like it doesn't push down, it doesn't change color, it doesn't make a noise. It's actually really disconcerting in VR or AR because it doesn't feel realistic. That's not what you expect to happen if you touch something in real life. So states are actually really important. They add to the sense of immersion and the sense that this digital UI element is actually real. Another important thing is basically like the range that you have to show content to the user. You don't want to go too far to the side. You don't want to go too far up, too far down. You really want to keep things within a comfortable range because after a certain amount of time, it actually gets really uncomfortable to kind of have to bend your neck to look up at something that's too far up or likewise too far down. There is kind of like a comfortable range in terms of where you would want to display your user interface in virtual or augmented reality. Because if you go too far off the rails there, outside of the person's comfortable degree of head movement, it's going to lead to just neck strain, fatigue, eye strain. So the comfortable range of movement is another important thing to keep in mind. One trick you'll see a lot in VR and AR apps is they use curved UI panels instead of like a flat panel. So maybe you're browsing like the Oculus home feed, or you're watching like the YouTube VR. You're scrolling through like the YouTube VR feed, and you'll notice that it's just kind of curved. It's wrapping around your vision, and the reason for that is if you look at these two diagrams here, looking at the one on the right where the display is flat, if I'm standing in the middle, it's the things further away from the center. So looking towards the left or the right of that display, those things are actually going to be further away from me. And so it's going to be a little smart. It's going to be a little smaller. It's going to be a little harder to see the content on the edges there. Whereas if the screen is curved, like on the left example, everything is roughly an equal distance from me because it's curved around the user's perspective and point of view. So no matter what point you look at on the UI screen, everything is going to be the same distance from you, and it's going to be a consistent size and scale. So this is why we curve panels. One thing that's important is like colors and patterns, and you want to avoid switching between very bright and very dark patterns, that kind of like strobe effect or anything that could cause not only trouble for photosensitive people, but it's also just, even if you're not photosensitive or prone to seizures or anything like that, it is just very disconcerting because you have to remember that you have a display very close to your eyes. So anything that is going to be extremely bright or extremely dark or switching between the two, it's just very fatiguing on your eyes. And it kind of like, it's like looking at the sun for too long. It's going to leave those weird patterns in your field of view. So light, brightness, color, those are important considerations. Also, repetitive patterns like stripes or zigzags, those actually cause like a really weird effect where as you're turning your head, it kind of does like that wavy optical illusion type thing where it starts to feel really trippy. So that's another thing to avoid. Finally, for a visual experience, don't take away control of the camera from the user. So imagine I'm standing there in VR and all of a sudden the screen starts zooming in on some other thing, but I'm still standing still. That's very disconcerting. So don't take away control of the camera. And as the person is walking, let's say the real user is walking in real life, don't simulate bobbing the camera up and down. Or maybe you're just pushing forward with the stick on the controller. Don't bob the camera up and down. It may look natural, like it does look closer to real life, but that kind of unsolicited bobbing up and down is actually going to be really uncomfortable. And finally, remember that your UI is with 6DoF room scale UI, where people can get up and walk around the room. They can literally walk right up to your UI. They can kneel their head down and look under your toolbars and over your windows and look behind them and see what's on the backside. So if you're taking shortcuts and like hiding sloppy elements and not painting certain edges of your elements and things like that, people are going to notice. Couple of considerations for input. Determine whether hands or controllers are the right method of input. Are they going to need the precision of controllers, or are hands enough? Try not to do anything that, try not to encourage huge arm movements that might actually be outside of the headset's camera's field of view. One thing we see at Oculus a lot is people actually, I feel like it's maybe a 50-50 split. Some people use VR standing, some people use it seated. A lot of people use it standing and then transition to seated mid-session. So make sure that if the person is sitting down, they're still going to be able to hit all of the buttons and access all the UI elements that they need to. And finally, these controllers have haptic feedback. So just like if you push something in real life, you expect that kind of tactile response. Give some haptic feedback on the controllers to make those interactions with virtual objects feel more realistic. Locomotion. So locomotion is basically movement within virtual space. And if you push forward on the stick, like I mentioned, the camera is moving, but you in real life are not. So that's very disconcerting, and it can cause motion sickness. So what a lot of VR apps like to do is use teleportation, where you use the controller and stick to mark a cursor on the ground, then you push a button and you instantly warp there. No animation, you're just there. And that's a much easier way to move around virtual space without the motion and the getting sick, because you didn't have to experience the motion of walking. Also, forward movement is more comfortable. Generally in real life, we're not walking backwards or strafing side to side. So if you do that in VR, it just feels really weird, and that's another thing that can cause discomfort. Finally, audio. Provide audio feedback on user interactions too, not just the haptic response, but audio is great too. You can try using the spatial audio technology to kind of signal when a user should turn around. Maybe you have something to show them there or something to their side. It's an interesting kind of audio cue you can give them to turn around. But don't rely solely on audio. Maybe the person doesn't have the volume turned up. Always augment video with audio, visual cue with audio. All right, and finally, the last section, getting started. So what sophisticated tools are we using at Oculus to design these computing platforms of the future? Surprise, it's Sketch and Figma. I wish I had a more exciting answer for you, but yes, Oculus, we still spend a lot of time in Sketch and Figma. And even when you're designing for VR and AR, you're still, building screens that have buttons and dialogues and nav bars. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's still interfaces. And we're still using Sketch and Figma for this. Our general workflow is make something in Sketch and Figma, prototype it in Unity, and then test it on the headset. So basically, we'll export PNGs of the layers from Sketch or Figma, apply them as textures to objects inside of Unity, and then test it in VR. Unity, if you're not familiar, it's 3D game development software. It's free for personal use, but it has a very steep learning curve. I think it's a good investment over the long term because you can do so much with it, and it's going to help you build really great prototypes, but the interface is very cumbersome. The ideal scenario would be being able to design VR and AR interfaces inside of VR and AR. And there are a couple interesting apps that do that, like Microsoft Maquette and Sketchbox, but those require a PC. So unfortunately, we're not there yet. And the best answer I can give you right now is learn Unity. I really wish I had something better. With that will conclude my presentation for today. Again, I really wish I could have covered more stuff, but I hope what I talked about today was insightful or helpful in any way. If you'd like to ask me anything, any other questions, feel free to reach out to me in any of these contact links here. I'm happy to help out however I can. But otherwise, thank you for the opportunity to present. I had a great time, and I hope it was helpful.
Aaron, it was amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Um,
My
I,
pleasure.
I know we're at time. Do you have a few minutes for some questions or do you have a hard stop?
I do have time for questions. Yes.
Okay, because we have a lot.
Okay.
But so because we have a lot, I'm just gonna say we'll probably won't cover all of them. I apologize for everyone if we won't have time to go over your questions. But let's try to have at least a few. And I'll save the chat so we can also post it in Facebook. Okay, so let's start. Let's see. Leo was asking, what is your opinion about wearable haptic feedback products in conjunction with VR? For example, haptic gloves, suits, or any other.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I particularly am a big fan of the idea of haptic gloves because we're starting to see so many more VR applications use real hands as like the input device. So, um, I think the tactile response we get from the haptic response we get with controllers right now is not great. And I think just anything to make it more immersive, to make it feel more natural. Yeah, I'm a huge proponent for that. I know at Oculus, we get stuff like that to play around with in the office, and it's always so cool to see that stuff come into fruition. So I love it. More of that.
That's awesome. Okay, Michal was asking, how do you test products? And I think it would be interesting to also ask this specifically now during COVID, that you probably can't meet potential users and give them the components to play with.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Um, I think actually the good news is that, well, I don't know if it's good news for us. um, we were actually very well positioned to be able to work remotely because we have been working on remote work tools for a very long time, VR remote work tools. So some of our engineers using some of these, in VR productivity things are able to actually work on the VR interface from within VR, and actually like edit the code and see it happen inside of VR. Like the changes get reflected there immediately. And we have virtual meeting spaces where we can review the product developments together, and so collaboration wise it's actually worked pretty well. In terms of testing, I guess there's a couple I'm not sure of the intent behind the question, if it was like user testing or just kind of like internal quality testing.
Yeah, I think user testing.
User testing, yeah. So a lot of our testing, we do a lot of user research. We have a huge user research operation, and a lot of it is done through, we recruit existing owners of Oculus headsets, and we will kind of ask them to use this new thing or use this new feature or try this app for a week or a month. And even during COVID, we've been able to do that because generally people keep the headset and use it themselves. They're not really, maybe they're sharing it with family, but they're not sharing it with people outside of the house. So they've still been able, the public has still been able to use their headsets that they have, and we're still able to get really good insights that way.
Okay. The next question actually came from me. So I was wondering, we all saw the social dilemma movie, and we all saw the um, ethical questions that we have around technology. And when you speak about immersive technologies like AR or VR, you have new dangerous situations that users can be in or can be addicted to. Is that something that Facebook is considering? And is that something of like the use protocol that you're currently developing?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're not kidding anybody. I know darn well what kind of reputation Facebook has in this space. So, of course, we know that. And, I think this year we have actually, we started talking about the principles that we're using to guide a lot of our product development, because, there's so much, these are very personal devices. I think, I think the biggest one is that we're going to be very clear about the data that we collect and when it's being collected, like clearer than ever, really, because of the incredibly sensitive nature of this, and not just the data that is collected from when you're using one of these devices, but being cognizant of and sensitive to other people that are also just around you, where the device is still collecting sensor data and recording and things like that. So we are absolutely thinking about those, and I it's our reputation for these tricky topics is well known, and it's something we think about basically every conversation in terms of product planning. Like uh, we know there's no there's no more room for screw ups here, because things have already gotten so bad. So I mean, I'll just say that uh, because of the pressure and because of the scrutiny and all deservedly so, we are being extremely scrutinous internally with the product decisions we make. And I think we know that we can't afford to release products that are going to be compromising that trust or privacy.
That's awesome to know. It's awesome to have such great designers working on this product and really caring about the users.
Thank
Um,
you.
we have a question from Avi. Could you tell us about the new AR XR glasses Facebook is working on, and is it pass-through or real AR?
Um, well, I can't provide any details about future products, but um, one thing we have already announced is that next year we are collaborating with Luxottica, which is the company that owns Ray-Ban, um, to develop a pair of smart glasses that I think you'll be seeing the fruits of that collaboration next year. That is a smart glasses product. Um, we've been clear that it's not the AR glass, ultimate vision that I've been kind of hyping up during my presentation. But yeah, I think we're not just Facebook. We're going to start to see more companies experimenting with the glasses form factor and figuring out, how do you work with the design of glasses where it needs to be very slim? How do you fit all the compute and the battery and everything into that extremely tricky form factor? So yeah, Facebook's definitely working in this space. We've acknowledged we're working on our glasses. Sorry, I don't have more to share there.
We'll have to invite you back next year. Um, okay, so Coral was asking. She was saying that she just started working as in the AR field and VR field, and she wanted to ask if you have any recommendations to where she can learn more about the space and get inspired by.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so some of the best places I've seen for really diving into more of like the process and the tricks and tactics for VR and AR design are one is so I talked about Unity during my presentation, which is like it's 3D game development software. Um, really not a UX design tool, but it is basically the best UX design tool we have for now for prototyping some of these VR and AR ideas. And because Unity is so incredibly popular and used by so many people, there are so many forums and community resources of people um, using Unity, wondering how to pull off certain tricks and things like that with their prototypes. So just kind of browsing like the forums there and going through some of like the community groups and the documentation. There's a huge YouTube video community of people posting like Unity tutorials because it's so popular. Um, so um, I do think like the getting a sense of how to really wield Unity to your advantage is a really important tactic for any VR or AR designer. So I think in that space there is a lot of community resources to rely on. other than that, just for more general VR and AR thinking, I actually think some of the, I know it's maybe it's not the first place you would think to go because it's more geared maybe towards like software developers and not UX designers, but the Microsoft, HoloLens, Oculus developer, they have really great websites that have actually like pretty comprehensive articles on important considerations and things to keep in mind as you work in the space. And it's a lot of it is relevant to designers and not just engineers. So these are companies that have been working on these kinds of products for many years now, and they've accumulated a lot of great knowledge, and they do share a lot of it in their documentation. So that's another great place I'd recommend, just going to Microsoft or Oculus or any of the major companies that have been working in the space, because they do publish a lot of their findings.
Okay. Noah was asking about physical safety. Like you mentioned that you'll have a battery on the back part. What are the considerations around safety around the battery heating? Is that something a designer also take into account?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in my day-to-day, I work on the software side, but I can definitely tell you that I've been in enough meetings with hardware folks to know that they are absolutely thinking of those things. And in fact, like I know of things that they have not, features that have not been incorporated into previous products because they were worried that there might be a very slight chance of like out of a 1% probability of maybe somebody misuses this and it causes harm. So I think we are very cognizant of that, and I can't speak to the specifics because I'm not sure of the process for that specific the battery example, but um, I can't imagine that there would be any concern there, because we've been so cautious in the past about batteries. One example there is one brief story. I don't know if you remember, but Samsung had that Galaxy Note 7 phone where the batteries were like blowing up on people, like the phones were exploding. And that was like at Oculus, people were flipping out because people were using phones in the Gear VR headset and putting them on their face to use VR. So we were extremely concerned. So we really, like the team at Oculus really went above and beyond to, alleviate that situation, make sure that, Note 7 was immediately bricked from Oculus, could not be used to avoid any potential fiascos there. So I know that we have a really good track record for safety. So I feel really confident in those kinds of decisions.
Okay, we'll do like two more. Okay, if it's great with you.
Sure.
Okay. Gideon was asking. You mentioned that we have a lot of development platforms like Unity that you mentioned, and Unreal and Arkit and other platforms that I don't know how to say. But if he wants to share his designs with the biggest audience, let's say even smartphone users, what is the best leading cross-platform where you can share it today?
Mm-hmm. I would lean towards Unity, and I think that's a subjective answer. I can see where people will argue with me on that one. I think Unity tries to be a very cross-platform development platform, and I think that has maybe a bad reputation in that sense because it's trying to spread itself so thin and run on basically every system, every platform. It's not really optimized well for every platform, so you might end up you could build something in Unity, but it might not have very great performance on on I don't know, on an iPad or some other device that technically it runs on because Unity supports it, but it just hasn't really been optimized because it's trying to be everything to everyone and not really great at one thing. So I still think that from a VR or AR designer perspective, it's still the right choice because there's like I mentioned, there's a big support community around it. It is. It's kind of like why, when I joined a company, I would use Sketch because everybody else is using it, and I know I could get help if I needed it, and that the team has resources built for it. It's kind of a similar story for Unity and in the AR and VR design space. So I still think it's the right call, and like I mentioned, it's super cross-platform. So if you wanted to launch on Android, iOS, Mac, PC, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, you could launch an app everywhere. And it's extremely versatile. Yeah, you just might end up having, if you actually do decide to launch an app for every single platform, you're probably going to have to go in and do some optimizations to make them really sing in each individual platform. But very versatile, and a great resource, lots of great resources for VR and AR people who want to get into the space.
Okay. Dor was asking, why did the Oculus menus are using the two-dimension paradigm? Sorry, it's right here. Paradigm instead of a 3D one, or is there a solution that involves both?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So I'll speak. Honestly, I don't know the official answer, but I can share what I think is my interpretation of just understanding the situation and why I think we ended up where we did. Yeah, all of our system UI in Oculus headsets is 2D. Sorry, for Quest and Quest 2 and Go. Rift does have some 3D elements in the system UI, but all of our mobile standalone products do use 2D UI. And part of that was for speed and efficiency, because we used to have this, we used to have the home screen of our headsets. You would have to like press the home button and it would quit you out of whatever app you were in. You would see a spinner for several seconds. It would load the home environment. That would spin until the feed items popped in. It was just very, very slow. And there was a huge effort to really overhaul the system experience. And kind of as a consequence of that, it was designed to be as lightweight as possible, which meant 2D elements, I think. I think from the design side, from the designer's point of view, we definitely want more kind of like 3D, more magical types of things. It is very flat right now. It is very, it works, it gets the job done, it's functional, but it's not, I don't think it's capitalizing on the magic of what a VR interface could do. So I think we'll get there. It's just we haven't really had the time to do it yet.
Okay, let's finish with a final question from Andre. I think it's an interesting one to finish with. He said that Microsoft seems to be focused on mixed, Apple on augmented, and Facebook on virtual reality at the moment. How long do you think this separation will continue before each company will branch out?
That's a very good question. It's funny because I think because Facebook acquired Oculus, they had such a huge, I guess, head start or existing frame of reference for virtual reality. So I think that's why Facebook is so all in on VR right now. Same for Apple, who never really got into virtual reality at any point in the past, but was very big on establishing AR Kit and developer tools to make AR experiences happen. So now they are kind of perceived as a leader in the AR space. Microsoft is kind of like this blend, as MR kind of is, where you get virtual and augmented in the mix of the two, very much kind of going after enterprise and business right now rather than consumer. But I do think that all three companies are going to find themselves in a position where it's all going to mix together. I can see how the work that Facebook Reality Labs does to build AR products actually makes the VR products better, because both a VR headset and an AR headset need very small components and have very rigorous requirements for power consumption and things like that. So the work that happens on both sides is actually improving both sides respectively. It's cross-benefiting each other. So I think we're going to see more of a natural progression and convergence of VR, AR. It's all going to shake out somewhere in the middle. And as that happens, as the technology just kind of moves in that direction, I think that's just the way the whole industry is going to go. And it's not going to be, either VR or AR. You're going to have a device that can kind of do it all, maybe. So we'll see.
Awesome. Aaron, thank you so much again for staying late with us. It was so
No
interesting
problem.
to hear from your experience and to learn more about this future of our work.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around, for staying up late over there in Israel. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the questions. And don't hesitate to get in touch if you ever want to reach out or ask anything else. Really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.